Welcome to Lawbalization, making sense of the world, where legal insight meets global perspective. Join me, your host, Jonathan Bench, as I sit down with leaders and visionaries to explore how law and business shape the way we live, work, and think. Let's make sense of the world, one conversation at a time. Welcome to Lawbalization. Today, I'm joined by Matias Otero Johansson, founder of Sihai Business Consultancy and freelance writer based in Shenzhen, China. Matias, I'm so happy that you're here with me today. Thank you for making the time.
Hi, Jonathan. Yeah, I'm happy to be here too. I'm very happy to get your invitation. We haven't talked in a while, and I feel like we have lots of things to talk about. So, shall I introduce myself a bit?
Please do let everyone know who you are and what you're up to.
Right. Okay. So, yeah. So, my name is Matias Otero Johansson, and as you can hear, I come from different backgrounds. I'm a dual national of Chile and Sweden, so I have a Latin American and Northern European heritage, if you will. And because that wasn't exciting enough, I also moved to China to do business here and learn the language and so on. And also partially because of my major, which is well, economic development and politics. Although there's a limit for the scope what you can do here. But yeah, I'm in Shenzhen and I run a business consultancy.
That's amazing. And how did you initially get tuned into China?
Well, as it goes back all the way to 2018, I'm studying Mandarin back in college, and I'm finishing my degree. And when you've studied economics for the last decade, you have China on your radar, right? The amount of people, the economic growth, and so logic dictates China will matter very soon, and even more so in the future. So I figured if I'm going to pick another country to get to know, it has to be the one because there's so little we know about it, at least in the West, right? The Chinese know themselves, but we don't really know them that well, was my impression at the time.
Great. I'm so looking forward to hearing about your perspective. So let's start with your multilingual, multicultural background. How has that shaped your approach to storytelling in international business? Because for me, and probably for you, the story matters, right? The background matters, why people are doing what they're doing, from very high government levels all the way down to business people. So how do you see that your multicultural perspective has really informed the way that you can tell stories in a meaningful way that resonate with people and actually teach what needs to be taught?
Well, it's not something you do on purpose, right? You grow up with a multicultural background and you just sort of have to deal with it and figure out who you are, where you stand, and what your viewpoint is. And I guess the advantage mine gives me is that I'm able to stand a little bit outside, maybe both China, both the US, and a little bit outside of Europe as well. So I grew up a lot in a developing country at the time, which has a certain perspective, but I also majored in college in Europe. So I've also acquired the developed country perspective as well. And so I'm somewhere in the middle, I guess. And so you're able to straddle a little bit both north and south. And that gives, I think, a good storytelling perspective to talk to people from all over the world without taking sides too much or assuming one viewpoint has to be the correct one because you're just from that country, right?
Yeah, that's great. So I want to hear a little bit more about your journey into China because when a lot of people have been leaning away from China, you and I have been leaning into it. So tell me why, first of all. I want a little bit of your backstory. Why did you decide that of all the things you could do, why did you decide to go back to China when the expat community in China has been hollowed out so much?
Well, I didn't really go to China for the money, so to speak. I didn't go there because it was the best paying position I could find. It was because it was the most interesting thing to do. So I know from a lot of people I met over the years, once COVID hit and the lockdowns hit, and everybody suddenly realized, oh, the police can do that. They can lock you in your house, right? So like all your special privileges as a foreigner living in China in that moment, are gone. So for a lot of people, that was a deal breaker. Especially, I know people who heard stories about, you have a young kid, a small kid, and if they get sent to another quarantine center at that time, they would be separated from their parents, and there's nothing you could do, right? So for a lot of people in the international business community, yes, I like working here. I like, doing business in China, but I'm not going to risk that happening to me, right? So that's the deal breaker for a lot of people. For me, it's sort of because I grew up in a developing country and I studied sort of how the Chinese system works. It goes with the territory. So for me coming back, it's more of a, okay, I know what I'm going into and I know how I have to deal with it. And you have to accept there's some things that could happen that don't happen back in your home country, right?
Yeah, amazing. And you're willing to just take it, like you said. When you study China, you just know there are some things that you have to give up as a trade for being on the ground and seeing things as they unfold. Matthias, as we look at the Chinese business environment the last few years, you are one of a small group of people, I think, who have continued to remain in China. So I'd love to hear from your perspective. How's the business community changed post COVID? Do you see things kind of trending upward or downward, or what exactly have you noticed in your time there in China in the last few years?
Right. So post-COVID, first of all, there's a lot less foreign visitors in general, right? You see a lot of tourist visitors, especially now with the open visa policy for tourists. So you see sort of backpackers or people traveling for fun, if you will. The expat business community that existed before COVID-19 is sort of decimated and slowly rebuilding. But it's not really the same group. A lot of the sort of old China hands decided, that's it, I've had enough. I'm not going to stay with COVID. So they went back home, right? So it's sort of a reset for the foreign business community. But it doesn't change the fact that this is the third or second largest economy in the world with a tremendous amount of people. So there's good reason to do business in China, provided sort of you know where you're standing, right?
Absolutely. So, Matthias, with the hollowing out of the expat community, you're one of a handful of people who have decided to stick it out. How do you feel about your chances as kind of building the new old guard? Because that's what you'll be in the next 10 to 20 years, and about your ability to help companies that decide they want to stick in China for the long haul.
Well, I mean, clearly, as a lot of experienced people have left for good, there's a lot of demand that can be fulfilled. There's a lot of opportunities as the people who come in don't have the same experience or background doing business in China. Also, the Chinese ecosystem itself has changed. Chinese companies have been forced to be able to do things without foreigners for quite a while. It's been difficult to get people to come here. I mean, it was impossible during COVID, and now it's sort of much less easy as when the US was very optimistic about China, right? So Chinese companies are deploying AI translation. They're using ChatGPT for most of their copywriting. Of course, the problem is that you don't have anyone who can verify what ChatGPT is saying because you don't have a native speaker. But it's still there's a lot of tools you can use to reduce your need for foreign employees, and I see a lot of Chinese companies are doing that, and a lot of sort of positions hiring foreigners now actually require at least basic Mandarin. So that time where you could come here and they basically assign you a translator, so you never had to learn the local language. I think it's coming to an end.
Fascinating, fascinating. Okay, so let's switch over to this concept of branding, because for companies that are looking at China as a market, they have to balance the needs of feeling like they can still stay in control of their branding and their messaging and their products with the regulatory and cultural expectations in China. So, how do you manage that, or how do you help companies manage that when they're looking at figuring out how do we crack China? Because you're right, there are fewer people learning Chinese, even though um, even though China now is pivoting to the point where people can no longer just show up as the foreigner and have a translator, as you said. But there's still a lot. I think that gap is widening still. So how are you going to be able to help them bridge that idea of we need to translate our brand values into Chinese? And you're one of the few people I think who will be able to help people understand that.
Right. So if we're talking from the perspective of a foreign company, let's say a European or US company, and you want to sell your product or your services in the Chinese market, there's two ways to do it, right? One is you remain a wholly foreign company and you send your products to China and they're sold there as an imported product or service, if you will. If we're talking IT services, that gets very difficult with the data laws. But let's say you're Louis Vuitton and you want to sell handbags in China. You either remain a foreign company with a foreign identity and you bet on that. So we are a 200-year-old European company with a long history of making handbags or watches or whatever have you. So there's that luxury angle. And Chinese people do perceive foreign brands as higher quality and more trustworthy, even as Chinese manufacturers are racing to catch up to all foreign manufacturers. The perception in China is that foreign regulatory environments are more reliable, so their products tend to be safer and more long lasting, that kind of thing. So you can bank on that, right? Or you can go into China for China and you can become a Chinese company or create a Chinese version of your brand. And then that is a far more complicated project and requires a lot of time and money and hiring local people who can help you navigate the system. And of course, then you probably also have a much better market potential, but then you need to realize your company in China is not the same company as you have back home. It's essentially operating in a different world, right? And that takes some time to discover, to get used to. I don't know if you heard about Starbucks selling their business in China. No, this came out a couple of weeks ago. It seems like they're losing the coffee war. There's several Starbucks competitors now in China. I use them because their coffee is better and cheaper, and like the only thing that Starbucks offers for me is a nice working space, but that's not that special. So Starbucks is kind of following a very long tradition of foreign companies who go to China and think this is a developing market, so it's going to be easy. It's not, right? Carrefour tried that. They also had to sell the company, right?
I remember shopping at Carrefour 20 years ago in China. Yeah, it was a big deal. Very upscale feel compared to the Chinese versions at the time.
Yeah, yeah, and now they're competing with Walmart with Olay, which is the new upscale one, and there's Hema as well, which is Chinese Carrefour. And so you're competing with the version of you that's native Chinese. You can't win basically. So you have to have something extra. You have to have something that's good enough for Chinese people to say, yeah, I'm gonna pick the brand that's more expensive, that's European, but what do they offer? It's not enough with just a brand cachet, right?
Absolutely. That's a good segue, actually, because I'm very curious about how the social media landscape has been changing in China. I know that any brand that goes into China has to be able to manage social media, and probably more so than any other. Maybe just from the scale, but also just because Chinese consumers are so dialed into the social media scene. So, what do you see as the way that Western companies look at social media in the West versus how they need to navigate social media use and really killing it there in China.
Right. So it's important to understand that the Chinese sort of digital ecosystem has leapfrogged most of what we have in the West. When the internet went massive in China, phones were already starting to become common, smartphones. So it just made a lot of sense to just have a phone app instead of building a website. So a lot of Chinese companies don't bother with websites, or they have them, but they don't look that good. They're not important. Most of the sales happen through video media, through apps, Douyin, TikTok, Little Red. or just the app platforms the companies build themselves. So the social media ecosystem is app based, it's not web based, basically, and it's audiovisual, and partially because Chinese is a difficult language to learn to read, even when you are Chinese. So people tend to prefer audiovisual material to get their information, actually.
That's a fascinating way to look at it because I'm thinking back to the time when I lived in China and the early days of the internet. And we had a desktop computer when my wife and I were teaching English in Sichuan province. We had a desktop computer. The mobile phones, this was early 2000s, so 2004, 2005. We had a desktop computer, but that's because we were on a college campus,
Right.
and smartphones were not smart enough yet to deal with the infrastructure. And so I remember thinking it would take forever to build out the digital infrastructure for China just to get broadband internet across. And then I heard from someone that they were bypassing that whole thing and just going straight to wireless communication. They were going to be able to broadcast wireless signals all over their cities. And so, like, once again, the leapfrogging of going past the digital, the steps that the West had taken in the digital growth, they were just able to leapfrog those and jump right to it. So that's a very interesting way of seeing it.
Right. So the leapfrogging bit is tremendous in China. I mean, you see it now with the EVs as well. I mean, Chinese automakers had joint ventures with Volkswagen for 2 decades, and they had troubles making a equal quality engine, internal combustion engine. But turns out you can make EV engines. They're easier to make, and China jumped in on that. They brought Tesla over. So they just essentially skipped that stage of development instead of trying to compete. And you see the same thing with the attitude towards technology. We in the West, we're a bit scared of our own technology. We're a bit, it's a bit scary. Black Mirror, Terminator, there's all sorts of scenarios we come up with whenever there's a new technology. We jump to the worst possible conclusion of what it can do, right?
Right.
Nuclear technology goes on and on. China is sort of the opposite. It sees technology as something that will save it, something that will bring it back to the ranks of great powers. It already has, right? So even with old people in China, they just start using the apps because they don't have this conception that, I'm old, I should not know technology. They're like, okay, I want to buy oranges at a bulk discount, and this app lets me do that. I will use it. End of story, right?
Fascinating.
Adoption of new technology in China happens in a different way because the fundamental sort of attitude is that this will make our lives easier and better, so we're going to use it. And damn the consequences, and so far it's it's worked out pretty well, right?
That's great. So let's pivot to AI because you and I definitely want to talk more about this. So, how are Chinese consumers responding to AI generated content, and how's that going to affect brand authenticity?
Right. So, I mean, as you probably know, the idea of authenticity doesn't hold as much currency in China as it does in the West. If you go to any app, you'll see live streamers, all of them using face filters, right? Dating websites, everybody's using a filter, or most people are, and it's sort of
I forgot to
completely
turn our face filters on. Yeah, sorry.
right, right. We could be prettier, but we're not, right? This is
That's right. This is
why
really
what
how we look.
exactly. Why are we not using technology to be prettier? We could, right? We're not. So we want to be authentic, right? But in China, it's more about being the best you can be, right? So if the filter does it and it's not authentic, then it's fine for a lot of people, right? So AI generated content, art, whatever, people sort of see it as another step in the technological ladder, and they're almost like, wow, cool, new thing. Let's just use it on everything, right? Whereas we are like, oh, AI slop, everything's the same now. We hate it. I mean, we still use it, right? But we whine about it, right? In China, it's more about, okay, this is a new technology. Let's see what we can do. And so, for example, a lot of people are saying that, a lot of model agencies are going to go out of business in China because it's just cheaper to use AI, right? And yes, it's not the same, and you and I can see the difference, right? And we can sort of tell when something's AI generated, but that's not necessarily a bad thing here.
So interesting. Yeah.
When you see sort of AI content or what people where I'm from that we call it slop, right? It's all slop coming out of this sort of sausage maker, and it comes out with stuff, right? And in China, you hear this complaint, right? Like, oh, this is AI generated, it's less than, right? And in China, it's like, well, this is practical, right? And it looks good, and sure, it's not super authentic, but it's easy to make and it looks good. Let's use it, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Do you hear anything in China about worries about job losses to AI?
Right, to AI. Okay, most people are worried about job losses in general with GDP growth being less than what it has been. Um, no, because people just see technology as a stepping stone towards things being better, right? Just as when factory automation is kind of reducing the need for cheap labor in China, which they have to do because cheap labor is going away, it's like it's technological development. You have to do it, or you'll be left behind, and you'll be less productive, and then you'll lose the race, right? And China is all about winning the race. Everybody's all about winning their race, right?
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by the hyper competitive environment of China. Growing up in the U.S., we always were just taught that it's the land of opportunity, and if you work hard enough, you can succeed. But the idea of this hyper competitiveness, I was never slated to go to an elite school, an elite high school or a boarding school or an Ivy League school, and so to some extent, I just figured if I dig in and work hard enough, I can still map my way to success. But enter a country with 1 billion people, and India is the same way as well. These two countries with these massive populations, and you have to compete from day one or you'll be left behind. And so that is a whole new, kind of, it was different when I conceptually understood what it was like, but it's very different being there in the system where you can see the effects of it. And when I was teaching English in China 20 years ago, I was with students who were in, it was a second tier, third tier city. And so I was teaching English to them, and most of them thought, I'm not going to use English. What's the point? I just have to take your class. And so I was able to see that from a different perspective because in the US, I thought that all people of Chinese descent were smart and driven, and they had to I just assumed it was inevitable for them to be successful. And so for me to go into China and see the different side of that coin, the ones who didn't have the opportunities for education and didn't have the income base that others did that were able to study abroad, for instance. Very interesting perspective, which is why I think you and I understand this need for getting outside your native country, getting the
Yeah,
perspective of others and understanding culturally what they've had to deal with from the beginning of their lives.
yeah. Earlier you asked me why did you return to China now that the sort of extreme optimism about China, it's a bit more moderated now, right? It is a one party dictatorship and so on, and back to sort of reality here. It's because I didn't want to be one of those people who talks about China but is never there, right? And that's a probably a workable career, especially if you want to say very mean things and be very critical, and that's also good. But the price of being critical is that you can't touch grass. You lose sort of the ability to be underground and see things, and you become biased. There's a certain unfairness. I see that myself when I post content online, when it's something that makes China look not so good, very popular, right? Immediately, okay, we knew this all along, right? And then when it's something like China developing a new steel alloy for the new fusion reactor in Europe, right? Which they did last week. They announced it, and it's a new alloy, and it's their own research, so it's legitimate R&D at the top level. It's not popular. Nobody's interested, right? So there's sort of a narrative where you can fit what you're saying to what people want to hear, but then you're not really in touch with the truth, right? So it's tricky. You want to be popular, but also you want to be right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so great. Maybe we end the conversation with that. I'm curious, what are you seeing in China that others are not seeing, or that is not being, is not a popular way to look at China right now. I've always looked at, I'm a lawyer, right? So I'm always looking at both sides of the discussion. And I don't want anyone to hide anything. I want it all to be out in the open, and then let everybody make their own opinion, because we're all coming with different backgrounds, with different goals. I have a lot of clients that still want to do business in China, still are doing business in China. They may not be celebrating it. It may be that they've taken a hit in China. But I'm with you. I think that there's a lot of nuance to a country that big, with that many people, with an uncertain future, like most countries. And the status quo in China today is not going to be the status quo in China in 10 years. And so I'm interested in what you're seeing, and how fundamentally you, let's say you're talking to someone who is on that side, where they've only heard negative things out of China for the last 10 or 15 years. What would you tell them about Chinese opportunities, Chinese success, and what ultimately will help many Chinese succeed in spite of all of these headwinds?
Well, I always like the quote by former Prime Minister Li Keqiang. Before retiring, he said that the Yellow River and the Yangtze River cannot flow backwards. And what he means by that is sort of that the process of national development, of economic growth, cannot be reversed. And try as you may, you cannot just kind of go back to the 80s or 70s where things were simpler, and Chinese people have better lives and more access to information and the ability to save money and then decide whether they want to participate in the economy at the current time or not. A lot of people actually are just kind of laying low because they don't like the opportunities they see, right? So in a sense, there's no stopping this process, because if it really did, people would be really mad, and that's not going to work. There, China has to keep growing, and that will require changes sooner or later, that I'm pretty confident have to happen. So if you want to do business in China, or you are doing business in China and you're here for the long run, just keep in mind sort of the long wave of history rather than the daily panic posting that you can see online or on media about, it's becoming North Korea tomorrow, right? That's not going to happen, right? Um, and as you know, Chinese people have lived through social change that dwarfs anything in human history. We have no idea where this is going, to be honest. Not even Chinese people do, right? So keep that in mind and keep an ear to the ground, I would say, and be open-minded, right?
That's great. Great. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know it's evening your time, and we've wrestled with technological difficulties, as you do when you're dealing with China. So I really appreciate you making the time, sticking around, and I'm looking forward to the next time we can catch up.
Yeah, no problem. And always happy to talk to someone who's interested about China. Uh, the perspective you develop here, it's something that's really interesting to share, but you don't always get the chance to do it. So I'm happy to get the chance to talk with you a bit.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Lawbalization, Making Sense of the World. To explore more conversations with today's legal and business minds, be sure to follow, rate, and share the show. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking questions about the world around you.